I was standing in line at the pharmacy when I realized I'd left my wallet in the truck. Not my whole wallet, just the one I keep in my coat, the brown leather one my wife Helen gave me for our 35th anniversary, the one with the worn stitching along the left side. I patted my jacket twice, checked my back pocket, and felt that cold drop in my stomach you only get when something important is missing. The woman in front of me was counting out change. She was maybe 75, small-framed, wearing a yellow cardigan that had been washed too many times. She had a paper prescription bag on the counter, and she was pushing quarters toward the cashier one at a time, lips moving slightly as she counted. The total was $42 and change. She was about $11 short. I stepped forward. "I've got it," I said. She turned around. She had pale blue eyes, the kind that look like they've seen a lot of weather. "You don't have to do that." "I know," I said. She looked at me for a moment, the way old people sometimes do. Really looked, not just a polite glance. Then she nodded and let me pay. The cashier ran my card. I picked up my own prescription, the blood pressure medication I've been on since my wife passed 3 years ago, and turned to go. The old woman was waiting for me by the door. "My name is Edna," she said. She held out her hand and I shook it. Small hand, strong grip. "Walter," I said. "I know who you are," she said. "You're the man who sold the Callaway property over on Route 9. My late husband bought lumber from you for 20 years. I blinked. Small world. Harold Marsh? She smiled. "That's him." We walked out to the parking lot together. It was February, and the sky was that particular gray that sits on top of everything in western Pennsylvania all winter long. She stopped beside a rusted Buick and looked up at me. "Your daughter's visiting this week," she said. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure how she'd know that. "She posted about it. Her Facebook is public," Edna said, as if reading my face. "I follow the town page. She tagged herself at the diner on Birch Street yesterday." I nodded slowly. My daughter Cassie visited 4 or 5 times a year, always called ahead, always brought food. She and her husband Owen had been after me for 2 years now to sign some papers, add their names to things, update the property trust, just practical stuff, she always said, just being responsible. I'd been meaning to do it. Edna was quiet for a moment. She looked out at the road, then back at me. "Walter, I don't want to get in your business, but I want to tell you something, and I want you to really hear it." "All right. Don't open your safe while she's visiting. Don't sign anything. And check the cabinet under the sink in your bathroom, the one behind the cleaning supplies, before you go to bed tonight." I stared at her. "I know how that sounds," she said. "I know, but I've been sitting on this for 2 weeks, and I can't carry it anymore. My granddaughter works the lunch shift at the diner on Birch. Last Tuesday she called me upset. She overheard 2 people, a man and a woman, talking in the booth behind her. She couldn't see them, but she heard them clear as anything." Edna paused. "The woman said he keeps everything in that floor safe in the study. Deeds, the insurance bonds, everything. Once he signs the updated trust, we're co-signatories on all of it. The man said just make sure he takes the full dose. He won't question it if you put it in the coffee." The cold I felt then had nothing to do with the February wind. "Your granddaughter," I said, "did she see them leave?" "She did. She recognized the woman from the town Facebook page. That's how I connected it to you." I thanked her. She squeezed my arm once, got in her Buick, and drove off. I sat in my truck for a long time, engine running, heat on, hands on the steering wheel, going nowhere. My daughter was arriving Friday. It was Wednesday. I want to be honest about what I felt in those 2 days. It wasn't just fear. It was something uglier and harder to name. A grief that runs underneath fear. The kind you feel when you find out that something you believed in was never really there. I kept thinking about Thanksgiving 3 years ago, the first one after Helen died. Cassie had driven 4 hours to be with me. She'd made Helen's stuffing recipe from the card in Helen's handwriting. She'd cried at the table. That woman had cried at the table. I thought about all the times I defended her. My brother Frank had never liked Owen, her husband. Too smooth, Frank always said, always angling. I told Frank he was being unfair. I told him Cassie had made her choice and Owen worked hard, and who were we to judge? I thought about that on Wednesday night, lying in bed, not sleeping. On Thursday morning, I called my attorney, a man named Stewart who'd handled the estate when Helen passed. I didn't tell him everything on the phone. I just told him I needed to come in before I signed anything and that I wanted to understand exactly what I'd be agreeing to if I updated the property trust. He said, "Come at 2." I went at 2. When Stewart laid out what a co-signatory trust update would actually mean, full co-ownership of all listed assets, the right to liquidate without a majority vote once a primary holder became incapacitated or unavailable, I sat with that for a while. "Who brought this draft to you?" Stewart asked. "Owen did, about 8 months ago. Said it was for estate planning." Stewart looked at the document. "This language here, this isn't standard estate planning, Walter. This gives co-signatories the right to act unilaterally under a fairly broad definition of incapacity. If someone wanted to access your assets without going through probate, this would be one way to do it." I asked him what I should do. He told me. That evening I went through the bathroom cabinet behind the cleaning supplies. It took me a while to find it because it had been pushed way to the back, behind the extra rolls of paper towels and a bottle of old tile cleaner, a small brown pill bottle, no label. About 30 small white tablets inside. I put the bottle in a Ziploc bag and put it on the passenger seat of my truck. Then I went back inside and I made dinner and I watched the news and I went to bed. Cassie arrived Friday afternoon. She came in with a bag of groceries, hugged me, said I looked thin, asked about my knee. Owen came in behind her, carrying a casserole dish covered in foil. He shook my hand too long the way he always did, asked about the property taxes, said the place was looking good, real good. We had dinner. I drank my coffee black, which I never do. I always take cream. But I said I was watching my calories. Owen didn't react. Cassie barely blinked. After dinner, Owen brought up the trust. "We just want to make sure everything's in order," he said. He had a folder on the table already open. "With your blood pressure and everything, it's just responsible. You know? Helen would have wanted this." The moment he said Helen's name, I felt something harden in my chest. Not anger. Something quieter than anger. Something final. "I spoke with Stewart this week," I said. A short silence. "Oh?" Cassie said. "Walked through the whole document. He had some concerns about the language." I looked at Owen. He said the incapacity clause is pretty broad. Said it wasn't standard. Owen smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't move the eyes. "It's just legal language. Standard boilerplate." Stewart didn't think so. Another silence, longer this time. Owen said they'd look into it. He said there might have been a miscommunication with the paralegal. He said we could have Stewart's office draft a new version if I was more comfortable with that. He said all of this in a smooth, even voice, leaning back in my kitchen chair like a man who had nowhere to be and nothing to worry about. I let him talk. After they went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights low, and I thought about how long this had probably been in the works. The visits. The groceries. The questions about the safe. I thought about the pill bottle in my truck, and I thought about Edna Marsh in her yellow cardigan counting out quarters, and I thought about Harold Marsh buying lumber from me across 20 years of seasons, and I thought about how many ways kindness circles back to you if you let it. I had a hard time sleeping again, but it was different this time. It wasn't dread, it was something more like clarity. Saturday morning, I drove to the county sheriff's office. I brought the Ziploc bag. I told the deputy at the front desk that I'd found an unlabeled prescription bottle in my home that I didn't recognize and that I had reason to believe it may have been placed there without my knowledge. He took my information and said they'd have the contents tested. He seemed like he expected me to be embarrassed. I wasn't. I also stopped by the local field office for the Pennsylvania Attorney General's Financial Exploitation Unit. I'd found the number Thursday night. I sat across from a woman named Patricia, and I explained everything. The trust document, the incapacity clause, the overheard conversation at the diner, the pill bottle. She took notes on a legal pad. She asked me to send Stewart's written assessment of the trust language to her office. I went home. I made lunch. I watched a ball game. When Cassie and Owen came downstairs that afternoon, I told them I needed them to sit down. I told them about the conversation Edna's granddaughter had overheard at the diner. I laid it out plainly, without raising my voice. I watched Owen's face go through several expressions. Disbelief, then a performance of disbelief, then something harder to look at. Cassie didn't say a word. She looked at the table. That told me what I needed to know. I want you to leave tonight, I said. Owen started talking. I let him go for about 30 seconds and then I held up my hand. I'm not angry, I said. I want you to understand that. I've already spoken to Stuart and I've already been to the sheriff's office and I've already filed a report with the AG's Financial Exploitation Unit, so there's nothing to argue about anymore. I just want you to leave tonight. They left. I stood on the porch and watched the car go down the driveway and disappear onto the road. The February air was very cold and very still. I could hear the creek down the hill. The next 3 months were not simple. The pills came back as a sedative compound, the kind used in elder care to induce sleep and confusion, the kind that at sustained doses could make an old man seem less and less capable of managing his own affairs. The Attorney General's office got involved. Owen's financial records turned out to have other problems beyond mine. He'd been working this angle with an elderly couple in Westmoreland County, too. The legal process took a long time. It moved the way legal processes do, slowly, with paperwork and postponements and depositions. Owen was ultimately charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, elder abuse, and conspiracy. He pled to reduced charges and received 18 months with 3 years of supervised release. He cannot hold power of attorney over any individual in the state for the next decade. Cassie was not charged. She cooperated fully once Owen's attorney started negotiating. She called me from a parking lot somewhere in Maryland 3 weeks after they left, crying, saying she didn't understand how things had gotten to where they were, saying Owen had convinced her it was just practical, just paperwork, that I wouldn't miss what I didn't know about. I listened. I didn't hang up. I don't know what my relationship with my daughter will look like going forward. That's a sentence I never thought I'd have cause to say. She is my daughter, and I love her, and she sat across from me in my own kitchen and said nothing while her husband talked about loading my coffee with pills. I'm 67 years old, and I don't have the energy to hold that as hatred. But I'm also not the man I was in November, before I stood in line at that pharmacy, behind a small woman in a yellow cardigan. Some knowledge changes you. Not always in the ways you'd choose, but it changes you. I called my brother Frank in March and told him the whole story. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then he said, I should have pushed harder. It wouldn't have mattered, I told him. I had to see it for myself. The old woman, he said. How'd she know to say something? Most people would have stayed out of it. I've thought about that. Edna Marsh called me in January, a few weeks after everything resolved. She'd seen a small article in the county paper about the charges. She said she was glad I'd been all right. I asked her the same question Frank had asked me. Why had she said something? Why had she said something? Why risk it? She could have stayed out of it entirely. She said her husband Harold had always told her that the worst thing a person could do was know something and say nothing. She said she'd spent 60 years trying to live by that. She said it had cost her in some ways and saved her in others, and she'd never found a better rule to live by. I told her I was grateful. She said that the coffee was reason enough. I still think about that sometimes. A cup of coffee and $42 of medication for a woman in a yellow cardigan. A small thing, the kind of thing you do without calculating the return, because there's nothing to calculate. You just do it because someone is short $11 and you happen to be standing there. I don't know where I'd be now if I'd been second in line that day instead of first, if someone else had paid and walked out before I got to the counter. If the whole morning had moved 2 minutes faster or slower. Sometimes the smallest actions are the only ones that matter. Not the big gestures, not the planning, not the documents. A stranger at a counter. A hand held out. A thing said plainly in a cold parking lot. The property is still mine. The house on the hill above the creek, the back 40 that backs up to the state forest, the old equipment barn I keep meaning to clean out. Helen's flower beds have been dormant since she passed, but I'm thinking about planting them again this spring, not to restore anything, just because it's time. My brother Frank drives up from Pittsburgh most weekends now. We watch the games on Saturday. He tells the same 4 stories, and I let him tell them, and somewhere in there, we have dinner, and the house doesn't feel quite as empty as it did. I still take my blood pressure medication every morning, and I still take my coffee black. I paid $42 and change for a woman I'd never met, and that $42 is the reason I still own my home. I don't say that to make myself sound wise. I wasn't being strategic. I wasn't thinking about returns or consequences or the long road of cause and effect. I was just standing in a pharmacy line on a February morning, and a woman in a yellow cardigan was $11 short. That's all it was. And yet that small, unremarkable moment became the hinge that everything else swung on. I've thought about that a lot in the months since. Not with pride, but with something closer to humility. Because here's what I've come to understand. The way you treat people when there's nothing in it for you. That's the truest version of who you are. Not the big moments. Not the speeches at funerals or the donations you tell people about. The small ones. The ones nobody's watching. Edna Marsh saw something in me at that counter. Or maybe she just acted on principle regardless of who I was. Either way, she told me the truth when it would have been easier and safer to say nothing. That kind of decency doesn't come from nowhere. It's built over a lifetime of small choices, most of them invisible. And I think about what it cost me not to have that same clarity about my own situation sooner. I was not stupid. I ran a business for 30 years. I read contracts. I knew Owen was too smooth. I'd heard Frank say it enough times. But I let comfort override judgment. I wanted to believe my daughter was who I thought she was, and that wanting, that refusal to think clearly about what I was actually seeing, nearly cost me everything. Being unwilling to examine something carefully because the answer might hurt you is not loyalty, it's avoidance. And avoidance has a price. What pulled me through wasn't luck, though luck played a role. What pulled me through was that when Edna told me what she'd heard, I didn't dismiss it. I sat in my truck in the cold for a long time, and then I moved. I called Stuart. I went to the sheriff. I went to the AG's office. I took the steps even though each one felt like walking further into something I couldn't take back. That's the part I want to hold on to. Not the outcome, but the willingness to keep moving when everything in me wanted to stop and pretend it wasn't happening. That steadiness, that refusal to fold, is the only thing any of us really has when the ground shifts. The property is still mine. Owen is serving a sentence. Cassie and I are in a place I don't have a name for yet. Not estrangement, not reconciliation. Something in between that we're both moving through carefully. And Edna Marsh calls sometimes. We talk about the weather, about Harold, about the old days on Route 9. She never mentions the parking lot. She doesn't need to. Some debts you carry not as a burden, but as a reminder. $42. A yellow cardigan. A cold morning when a stranger decided that knowing something and saying nothing was not something she was willing to do. I try to live by that now, too.